For those of you just coming in, welcome to a panel discussion of environmental justice in Evanston. I'm Rachel Rosner, the president of Citizen Screener Evanston, and this is Earth Week for Everyone, a multifaceted, multi-day event, and it's full of rich conversations, and I'm sure this one will be no different. This is such a crucial conversation for us to be having here in Evanston. Environmental Justice Evanston is a program of Citizen Screener Evanston, and they are doing critical work in our town. Tonight, we're going to also hear from citizens who are directly impacted by environmental justice in our town. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Rick Nelson, a longtime Evanston resident and the co-chair with Janet Alexander Davis of CGE's Environmental Justice Evanston Committee. Rick also previously served for 12 years on the board of directors of the Evanston Environmental Association. And so, Rick, I will let you take it from here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rachel. And first off, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. So if I could get just a response from anyone, but
sound great, Rick. We can hear you.
There we go. So hello, everyone. On behalf of Citizen Screener Evanston, I just want to welcome you to our panel discussion on environmental justice in Evanston. My name is Rick Nelson. I'll be the moderator for this session. And this session will consist of a panel who will field questions on a variety of topics relating to environmental justice in the city of Evanston. So we have 4 outstanding panelists tonight, and all of them have a connection in one way or another to environmental justice in Evanston. So let's introduce them to you. We're going to start with Kumar Jensen. Kumar is the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer for the City of Evanston. In this role, he focuses on centering people in Evanston's approach to preparing for the impacts of the climate crisis through implementation of Evanston's carbon neutrality plan, In addition, Kumar serves in multiple leadership capacities within the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, including as a founding co-chair of the People of Color Support Initiative. Our next panelist is Dorothy Head. Dorothy is a retired widow and 5th Ward resident. Dorothy has lived and worked in Evanston for over 4 decades and has been very involved in the community, especially during Dolores Holmes' term as the 5th Ward Alderman. Dorothy was actively involved with Evanston Neighbors United, who worked on issues connected to the Church Street Waste Transfer Station. And later, Dorothy joined the Environmental Justice Evanston Committee and served with them till January 2019, when she retired as an honorary member. Next is Mike Boll. Mike is a high school chemistry teacher at Niles West High School. Mike became involved in the EJ movement while working to stop Tape Coat Corporation in Evanston from emitting asphalt odors into the Smith Park neighborhood. Working with the city and state health officials, as well as many concerned and passionate neighbors, Mike was able to successfully force Tape Coat to shut down this process after over 2 years of effort. And finally, our last panelist is Lorraine Williams. Lorraine has been a resident of Evanston for 25 years and has lived in the Warren Street neighborhood for the past 12 years. She and other neighbors have been working for several years to resolve many of the issues in the area, some of which have become more problematic recently and some of which neighbors have become more aware of because they are spending more time at home and noticing all the odors, respiratory irritants, trash, noise, and vibrations coming from the area immediately to the west of their neighborhood. So thanks to all of you who are participating tonight, and welcome to this session. Before we start, I want to do a quick run through of our format tonight. For the first half of the session, I'm going to pose questions to our panelists based upon their experience and involvement with EJ issues. Only one panelist will answer each question. And during this first part of the session, the audience can submit questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom. So I'd ask you to use that feature, not the chat feature, just so we have all the questions going to one place. Halfway through the session, we'll look to see if questions have been submitted by the audience, and if there are, I'll offer up those questions to the panelists. and panelists' answers should be limited to around 2 minutes. If anyone starts to go too long, I'm going to politely remind them to start wrapping up. So on that, let's get started. I want to start off with our first question to Kumar. The environmental justice movement in Evanston has gained momentum in the last year due to the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the adoption of an environmental justice resolution in Evanston. Kumar, what do you think the EJ movement in Evanston will look like going forward?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Rick, for the question. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a really great question, and I think it gets at this observation I think that many of us have made in Evanston when we think about the history of activism throughout the community. There's obviously very deep seated types of activism throughout Evanston, and I think the sort of racial and social justice activism has a very long thread in history in Evanston, but it hasn't always been connected to environmental concerns or environmental justice. I think with sort of how CGE was created and how a lot of the community efforts around organizing around climate change and environmentalism dating back to, well before the early 2000s, but in the early 2000s, that was when the first climate action plan was created. I think there's also, deep-seated and long-standing histories of activism and organizing in the environmental and climate space as well. And I think one of the things that I've certainly seen in the 7 years that I've been in Evanston, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, has been a convergence of these movements in some ways, and even bringing in organizations that are interested in things like affordable housing and food access and food justice. And so what I see moving forward is that, all of these different organizations are doing, I think, a tremendous job of identifying where they can build solidarity together and where there are issues that address many of their concerns. Because I think at the heart of a lot of activism is the desire to create better experiences and lives and environments for people in communities. And so I think that that's where sort of the things that I get to observe as a city official, and what I see is that there's a lot more collaborative and sort of cross-organizational collaboration moving forward. And I think it's really exciting, and I think it's happening on both sides. It's not just one group trying to, bring other people into the room. I think it's this recognition of mutual understanding and benefit from this organizing.
Okay, thanks, Kumar. I'm sure basically representing the city, I'm sure that people got a lot of value out of hearing your take on what will be coming up going forward. So next question is for Dorothy. Dorothy, the Church Street Waste Transfer Station is a waste consolidation site that produces air pollution, odors, noise, strong vibrations, truck traffic, and rodents located in what historically has been a Black neighborhood in Evanston. You got involved with a fight against the waste transfer station many years ago with a group called Evanston Neighbors United, and continued that fight with Environmental Justice Evanston. Why was it important to you to fight against the waste transfer station?
Thank you, Rick, for that question, and I'm happy to be a part of this discussion this evening. Really, because I thought I could help make a difference. We were very upset when 2 people from Leadership Evanston came to the 5th Ward about a decade ago and pitched us about the waste transfer station and how it came about, and how these waste transfer stations are normally located in low-income minority neighborhoods, etc. So a group of us got together and thought, okay, we would work on this, and hopefully we were planning to get them to relocate, but that didn't happen, as we found out that later on down the road that the Illinois EPA had actually issued the waste transfer station a license in perpetuity. So there was no way they would ever be leaving unless they wanted to. So it sort of led to where we are now, what happened with us leaving that particular Evanston Neighbors United and going into the group that we have now, or that I was a member of, or I still honorary member of, and trying to, make some changes through ordinances and et cetera, so that people don't have to go through this, because many people that live in Evanston, even now, probably don't even know that a waste transfer station is right in the middle of the neighborhood, where it really should not be. And it should never happen to anybody else, any people like this ever again. So that was the reason why I got involved, the reason why I stayed involved, and the reason why I try to do whatever I can to, bring about change.
Well, thanks. And hearing about, your experience and why you got involved, I think is actually a good motivator for a lot of us to continue working on some of these bigger EJ issues in Evanston. So thank you for that. Next question is for Lorraine. Your neighborhood that is north and east of the Home Depot on Oakton Street has been adversely affected from an environmental standpoint by some of the local businesses. Can you briefly describe some of the issues that you've been experiencing there?
Sure, Rick. Thank you very much. Thank you for, including me on this panel and giving us an opportunity to help people become aware of things going on over in this area. I think there are many people that visit the shopping facilities along Oakton, but a lot of them really never have an opportunity to know what's going on behind that area. Well, basically, I think we've got all the bases covered. We have air issues with regard to both odor and irritants. We have the smell of asphalt being produced over by the canal. That once upon a time was a seasonal business, and that within the past 2 years was given permission to double its size and go to year-round production. So we're definitely not heading in the right direction with regard to this. We also have a facility that was moved there that has mulching materials. Again, we were told, that it would be contained and covered and there wouldn't be odors or dust. That is unfortunately not true. When there's a southwest or south wind, our neighborhood smells a whole lot like a West Texas cattle farm. And we have businesses over here, some of which aren't even legally registered, and they are providing automotive support and repair, and some of them are burning tires. And then we've got really large piles of crushed road debris and building materials over near the canal and also behind Mount Trashmore. That again, when we have a southwest or a west wind, there is quite a bit of dust that comes to our neighborhood from there, as well as from the mulching facility, and also as a result of the heavy truck traffic that comes and goes from the cement production facility, which we were also told was going to be a seasonal temporary business and has now turned it into, just within the past 2 years, was given permission to become a permanent and year-round production facility. Obviously, we also have water and soil contamination because of all the automotive repair work and storage that is over in this area. We have an inordinate amount of trash that comes over from the parking facilities that are part of the shopping areas around here. And with that trash, unfortunately, also comes rodents. So we do have some rat problems in this area.
And Lorraine,
and then there's noise.
I'm going to have to ask you if you can, just to
wrap up.
Try to
Yep.
wrap up. Thank you.
And then obviously we have lots of noise and vibration issues from truck air horns, where the trucks are asking people to open the gates for them at the city facility, and just heavy truck traffic, external speakers at the automotive place, so their phones ring outside, and just the general congestion of large trucks coming and going through our area.
So Lorraine, thanks for that answer. And for some of the people listening in, as you mentioned, you may not know that a lot of this activity is going on. Many of us who may drive up and down Oakton may not be aware of that if it's something that we're doing fairly infrequently. But you have just described an area that has quite a few environmental justice issues. So I think that that's good information for people in the audience and on the panel to learn about. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Our next question is for Mike. Mike, tell us about the environmental issue that you and the Smith Park neighbors fought against, and what is the best piece of advice you could give to others who are fighting similar issues in Evanston?
All right, thanks, Rick. So I live in the Smith Park neighborhood, so I'm going to share my screen here just to give everybody a sense. Can you guys see the map I've got up here?
Yes.
So I'm here at 1810 Ashland. We were fighting against this tape coat company here, which is really all these buildings here. We've got the bus company here and the waste transfer station here. It's really just northeast of ETHS along this old railroad tracks, which is really where all these sort of industrial commercial operations are happening here. But tape coat in particular made a product. It was an asphalt tape that's used to wrap pipes that are buried underground to keep them from corroding underground. As part of the process, they heated up the asphalt and put it onto a cotton backing, but it really didn't have any emissions control. It just sort of vented out the top of the building here. And we're, right across from Smith Park, less than half a block from where, a lot of the kids in the neighborhood play here. I'm the immediate neighbor here. East of them. And, when I moved in, I've only been here 4 years. So I do have to, kind of thank everybody that's come before that has really paved the way in trying to do anything about these issues. But when I first noticed these odors, and they were really, really bad at times, I kind of thought, well, it's probably just me. I'm the nearest neighbor. So it's probably just something that's affecting me. Do I really want to complain about this, or am I just kind of that not in my backyard kind of person? And so really the biggest piece of advice that I would say would be to contact your neighbors, because when I started asking around, we're lucky enough to have a neighborhood email list that I sent something out to and just sort of said, hey, is anybody else, noticing this? And I ended up making a spreadsheet that people could add whenever they smelled something. They could add to the spreadsheet. You could see I started it myself just to kind of keep track of things. And then as we go here, you can just see all the neighbors, all the different people that have, added to this spreadsheet with their own observations of when they smell it. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of entries just over the couple of years that we were working on this. And I go back to the map here, and I kind of have all these little dots here are people that have, had an entry onto that spreadsheet. So it really was affecting the whole community, which was really surprising to me. I never expected it to go really as far as it was, and to realize that, you're not the only one that this is affecting. And so, to try to do something to help your own environment, it's going to help everyone around you as well. So I guess that's my biggest piece of advice, is to get your neighbors involved. You could see on the spreadsheet, we kind of put some information in there. What did you smell? What did it smell like to you? What time was it? Where are you located? How strong was it? Did you report it to 311? We had a lot of people putting it into the health and miscellaneous 311 requests. We had some people who were dealing with headaches and other health issues, so we put a comment in there. I started keeping track of wind conditions and sort of trying to get an idea of, okay, which way was the wind blowing? And then I highlighted all the people that were, submitting for that particular day. So you could really make that connection of, hey, when the wind is blowing out of the southwest, all these people to the northeast are smelling this. This is a real neighborhood issue. So get your neighbors involved, try to use technology, and gather as much information as you can is really my biggest piece of advice.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And, one thing I would say is Mike and the Smith Park neighbors really have a great success story as far as organizing themselves and basically, as a group using the spreadsheet that he actually just presented. So that's something I think Mike had also indicated he would be happy to share as far as, his spreadsheet, and if other people have issues that spreadsheet would help on, he would actually be willing to share that spreadsheet with you. So thanks, Mike. And let's go on to Kumar once again. And Kumar, the question is the staff in city government becoming more aware of the issue of environmental justice and specific EJ issues in Evanston? And if so, how is that awareness happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the obvious answer is that I'll start with the how. The how is that community activists and residents like the three that are on this panel, as well as many others, are making it very clear to city staff and elected officials, and obviously some of these organizations like Tape Code and the operator of the waste transfer station and many of the businesses that Lorraine mentioned, that there are issues, right, with their operations, and it's having an impact on people's lives and their lived experience. And so I think that's like one way absolutely that many more staff, I'd say in the past 2 years, have been involved in learning about and trying to figure out what the city is actually even able to do and equipped to do in response to many of these concerns, right? It's helping us understand how our zoning code and our permitting and other enforcement mechanisms are or are not well equipped to respond to these types of complaints and questions and issues, right? I mean, Mike talked about 311. 311 is oftentimes our default sort of, if you have a complaint, you see an issue, put it in a 311, but 311 doesn't necessarily work for every type of complaint, right? Or every type of inquiry. And I think that many of the things, particularly related to odor or things that are very difficult to verify if you're not there, sort of immediately, or you don't have, a consistent record, can be difficult for staff to really understand how to respond to them. And so I think staff are much more aware. I've had many more conversations internally with members of the community development department, health and human services, our public works team, our attorneys over the past couple of years than before. And I think, I mean, even this week, I've had conversations about many of the issues happening, particularly around like the garbage and the odors related to some of the businesses that Lorraine was mentioning, and talking again about what's going on around the waste transfer station. And so, and I know, just to speak to the tape code issue in particular, that took a lot of staff, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it did end up involving quite a few staff in the health department and the law department to really understand, okay, what is the city's role? What can we do? Maybe why haven't we been doing it before? And so I think there's absolutely a heightened awareness, and it's even trickling into things like our IT department and our JAS team, right? And thinking about a lot of these things are locational and they change over time. So how can we create a good record of what's happening so that we can understand what residents are saying and what they're concerned about, but also so that as we move into creating policy like the environmental justice resolution, we have good information to back that stuff up.
Okay, thank you, Kumar. It's actually great to hear that it's kind of EJ is basically infusing into the culture and the processes of the city. So I think that's actually a very positive thing for our audience to hear. Next question for Dorothy. Dorothy is a longtime Evanston resident. Do you think things are getting better, staying the same, or getting worse as far as the city government and its residents working together to resolve environmental justices in Evanston?
Uh, uh, I really think, I really don't see too much of a difference in it, and especially in our neighborhood. I find it quite interesting that Mike was talking about the spreadsheet, etc. We tried a technique like that also, and when we were Evanston Neighbors United, and it really didn't get too far. I mean, it would appear that the information that we were sending got lost, or they didn't have any record of it, or whatever. So and I hate to be, I hate to sound alarmed, but I think it's more of who you know rather than what you know and where you live. And we just did not get, I think the city tried to help at some point, but of course, with the waste transfer station having all the money and all the prestige and et cetera, they, applied some pressure, and I think the city kind of backed off. So I would say, I don't think it's getting worse, but I certainly don't see any real change, not in my neighborhood anyway.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that candid observation. From your perspective, you've been in the city for, I think, as you mentioned, 4 decades. So, we can always count on you to basically give basically unvarnished truth relative to your experience. So appreciate that very much, Dorothy. Lorraine, you participated in a tour this past Saturday of businesses that you had described in your first answer to the first question. And those businesses are the source of some of the local environmental issues that you talked about. Do you think that there's a growing interest in your neighborhood to address these issues? And do you have any thoughts to share with others trying to organize on how you attract and get more people to join you in the fight against these issues?
Well, I think that some of the awareness is coming from the fact that more people are working from home and more people are doing homeschooling. So they're spending much more time in their local environments rather than scooting out the door at 6 or 6:30 in the morning and commuting and then coming home and not getting to spend much time in the neighborhood. So I think that's created more some of the awareness. As far as the motivation to make change, that is, I think, is a little early for us to tell right now. We're just sort of in the beginning stages of trying to get some organizational structure put together, and we're trying to determine what will be the most effective tools for us to use in the neighborhood. It's been mostly individual efforts prior to this. We've thought about a neighborhood Facebook page. We've thought about the possibility of finding out if neighbors would be interested in being part of text alerts, so that when something was going on, there was a violation or there was an odor, we could text out and just say, if you're experiencing this, would you please report it? I've actually also thought about just planning some events along Oakton using environmental protest signs and just letting people know, our children want to play and be able to breathe safely in this area. Please be aware and get some information about, maybe going to this Facebook page, get some information about what is actually going on in this area, and just see if we can raise awareness, because I really don't feel that any problem anywhere in Evanston is just that neighborhood's problem or even that ward's problem. I think that when one Evanstonian is suffering, then we all suffer, because in the long run, everybody is affected by each other's troubles and struggles. And we raise each other up by working together. So I'm hoping to not just get the neighborhood, but more awareness across Evanston about what's going on. And we are getting, some amazing response of support from our current alderman, Cicely Fleming, and the parking enforcement people to try and keep the streets open back in this area, because one of our big issues has been that we have such an alarming concentration of highly combustible and highly flammable materials in such a small area. And sometimes there have been literally been fires and explosions over in this area within the past 4 or 5 years, where sometimes the emergency vehicles and the first responders literally can't get back to the issue that is where the blow up or a fire has occurred. And so the parking enforcement people have been helping with trying to keep the streets clear. And we're going to be trying to reach out to the county and the state with regard to some possibility of finding out, are there any regulations regarding tow yards other than regulations regarding fees and what they can charge, which is the only regulations I'm currently aware of. We have some business owners over there who have really helped out, like after the last conflagration of explosions that literally shook our house. We had one of the business owners over there who built a private cement road that would allow first responders to get back into that area and be able to get to the worst areas where fire was most possible, and would be able to handle the weight of the trucks. Because the last time they had to respond, they had to actually physically go back in that area without the trucks. And some of the explosion and the heat and the fire was so intense that it literally ruined the first responders' fire gear. It just melted it. And we also had a fire caused by production and storage of nail enamel products. And all of this is right near Home Depot, a store that is filled with fertilizers, cleaning supplies, paint products, and lots of lumber. So if things were to start over here, it could get very, very out of control and very serious in a hurry. And all of it is literally across the street from a residential area.
So I think you just continue to highlight, kind of like the depth and the breadth of the issues that you're contending with. And I think a lot of people would probably be surprised to hear about some of the things that are going on there. And one other suggestion, and I don't want to volunteer Mike's time for him, because as he just mentioned before we started up, he has 3 young children. But I think that their experience working on the issue at Tapecoat would be something that you might want to discuss with him, because they did some organizing. Maybe they have some ideas that they could share with you that would actually be beneficial to you. But I think if we have these different groups fighting different problems, it certainly makes sense for people to work together and see if they can share good ideas that brought success. So just another thought and suggestion there. So thank you for that, Lorraine. Now to a next question to Mike. Mike, now that the odor produced by Tapecoat has been stopped, do you and the Smith Park neighbors have a next environmental justice action item on your agenda?
So this was actually Q&A. So I answered it in the Q&A. There is another odor. It's not quite as offensive as the asphalt odor, but yeah, they are still producing stuff. So they're still emitting fumes and whatnot. I wanted to speak a little bit to what Dorothy said, and I want to thank her for everything that she did do with the transfer station. And I don't remember if it was her that I talked to, but I did talk to somebody from that group, and they mentioned that that they had that sort of list of complaints and whatever, and that's sort of what got the Google sheet going in my mind, where she mentioned, oh, they would say they lost it or whatever, but if it's online and you send it to them, you can't really claim that, you know what I mean? It's there. You send an email, there's a record of the email. If you send a letter, they could say, got the letter, I don't know what happened, the post office, wow. But you send the email, it's like, hey, I sent you 10 emails. I know you know how to check email. I called you this many times. So I think that sort of persistence is important as well. But really, something I want to mention is for the tape code issue, what really actually got it solved was me reading through their permit. So I downloaded their Illinois EPA operating permit, which is 21 pages of super boring, speak about how many VOCs they can emit and this and blah, blah, blah. And I read through the whole thing. And on page 10, found this little nugget here: in the event that the operation of this source results in an odor nuisance, the permittee shall take appropriate and necessary actions to minimize odors, including not limited to change in raw material, installation of controls in order to eliminate the nuisance. And really it was that line combined with just the EPA. Once I started talking to some people at the Illinois EPA and said, showing them the spreadsheet, and they said, okay, well, you've got 20 different neighbors that are, saying they have an issue here. Yes, this is an odor nuisance. We've got this many 311 calls and texts and things like that. But really it was the EPA that had the teeth to, at first, to be honest, if they could have fixed it and still been running, okay. I mean, a lot of my neighbors have issues with the trucks, and there is a park right there. That is a definite legitimate concern. There are other issues surrounding all these businesses. But for me, the asphalt fumes being carcinogenic, that was absolutely number one. With 3 little kids, we play in the backyard. I'm a high school teacher, so I'm off in the summers, and we're out there during the day, and that's when they were operating. So for me, it was really, that was a driving force for me. But then as far as getting the action done, it was really the EPA, Illinois EPA, that made it happen.
Okay. I think there's a lot of good information there. Once again, that information sharing, especially with Lorraine and anyone else who's out there in the audience who's participating from that area around the Home Depot. This is all, I think, really good information to help them out. So we are probably a little bit over halfway through the session. I am looking at the Q&A. I actually have 4 additional questions, but I think we're going to segue now. If we get through the questions that the audience has asked, we can certainly always go back to some of the original questions that we had prepared. But let's try to make sure that we get the audience questions resolved. So I'm going to start off with the first one that I'm seeing there. And this is a question from Janet Alexander. And the question is, Lorraine, has there been an air study in your neighborhood that you know of?
No, there has not.
Okay. So that's something, obviously, there's multiple producers or potential producers of air pollution there. So that's something obviously to consider. There was one done at the waste transfer station, and that was done kind of at the behest of the city. And that took a while and produced some results that kind of made it an intermediate step to go further than that. But obviously it's something that can be considered, and if there's a way to make that happen, that could be something that you guys in your neighborhood group might want to consider that.
Well, it's my understanding, Rick, that that's actually quite an expensive task. The equipment needed to do it is very expensive. The only reason that the study was able to be done by the Waste Treatment Center was because there was a large sum of money put aside from the potential lawsuit, and that's what helped pay for that. Also, it's my understanding that the equipment that is used in these air studies are set to look for very specific pollutants. You basically have to know what pollutant you are looking for and set the equipment for that, and then it can find it or say, no, it's not here. There is no, to my knowledge, there is no equipment that can just take in an air sample and run a random test to see if there are any pollutants in there without you first telling it what to look for. It's basically, it's an air quality study. It desperately needs artificial intelligence built into it because you have to tell it what to look for right now. It doesn't look itself. So we haven't looked at that as being a first step, first of all, because of the vagaries, and second of all, because of the expense. And I know that the city actually returned that equipment because to buy it was exorbitantly expensive.
So I think, I think you're absolutely right in the information that you just conveyed. And I think, the only way that that would become a possibility if some outside forces got involved, like, so for example, if, there was money available through a grant or some other means to do something like that. And you're also right in that you really have to know what it is you think you might be measuring for, because if you basically go in there blind, it's going to be almost an impossible task. So yeah, that would certainly be something that would be maybe towards the end of your list if there was faster, more efficient ways to get the results you're looking for.
Yes.
So Janet Alexander Davis also asked a second question. Lorraine, I agree. Oh, let's see. I agree. Your problem should affect us all. It was our entire city residents would be better off. So that was actually a comment by Janet.
Thank you, Janet.
So Claire is asking, what's the best possible outcome with the waste transfer station? So if I could, I would speak to that myself, but I'm the moderator. It would probably take up the rest of this time frame. But I'm actually going to put that out there. Does anybody actually want to raise their hand and take that one on the panel?
I mean, I think I would defer to Dorothy. I'd be glad to add in what I think, just from the years that I've been working on it. But I think Dorothy should speak to this. And Dorothy, I think you're muted right now.
Yeah, I muted myself. Repeat the question so I can clearly understand what you're saying. I'm sorry, Rick.
Sure. So Claire asked, what's the best possible outcome with the waste transfer station? So she's looking forward in the future. What is it that we think might be possible, whether that be a year from now or perhaps 4 years from now, 7 years from now?
Well, at this rate, I don't think there is no outcome, since they have a license to, it's private property. They have a license to operate until eternity. I mean, not unless there is, as Mike went through their operating procedures or whatever and found that one item. I don't know if any of us have ever done that, where we can go back and say, well, maybe you didn't operate the way you should have. Maybe that's the only thing I can see. I don't see of anything ever happening unless they outgrow it, or unless because of things, everything is going green and whatever, maybe they will not, it would be not a use for it any longer. I don't see it. I mean, I can't see that far in the future. What about you, Kumar? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think the like practical, like it's always important to be like practical, right? And to recognize what control or what leverage the city has or community organizations have over the operation of this station, which is permitted by the state of Illinois. So the city cannot revoke its permit, right? And similar for Tapeco. But I will say that I think that the city has a lot of other tools in its toolbox of policies that it can use to sort of tighten the screws on the waste transfer station and try to get it to at least be more in line and have less of an impact on the surrounding neighborhood. I think, aspirationally, I think the best case scenario is the waste transfer station is closed and it doesn't exist anymore in that neighborhood, and that land is remediated and put back into use, in some much better, much more appropriate, far less intense use than what it is right now. And so I would say I am, and I just want to recognize I'm a city staff person. I do not live in that neighborhood, right? So my perspective is is very different, I think, but I'm optimistic that there are a lot of other tools that the city could and should be using to try to explore how to make that location a less desirable location for this type of operation, because it's unacceptable that it exists in this neighborhood. I mean, it's unfathomable, except that it exists, right? No one would really be able to think, oh, that's a great place for this, given the high concentration of neighbors and residents, and there's a school nearby. Mike mentioned there's a park, there's all sorts of activities. There's a bike lane that goes in front of that facility. There's so many incompatible uses, related to that waste transportation. I can't really think of a worse location for it in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of terrible locations for it, but that is a uniquely bad location for it.
So thanks for that. I'm looking at the Q&A. I think we've gone through the Q&A and addressed those. So we do have some additional questions, and I'd like to basically continue on until we basically hit our endpoint. But I think our next one really was for you, Kumar, and that is, do you have any general advice for people experiencing environmental justice issues as to how they can best work with the city to resolve those problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a strange one to give to me, given that I think we have three experts in the community who all have different experiences working with the city, right? And I think we've heard a lot of good examples of things that community organizations and individuals do in terms of getting the city's attention and trying to hold the city's attention, right? I think that's one thing that I've certainly heard from a couple of the other my fellow panelists, is that sometimes the city will pay attention, but then, if this is a multi-year process or goes on for long enough, sometimes the attention goes somewhere else. And so I think that obviously educating city staff is sometimes necessary. It certainly shouldn't be the obligation of community members to have to do that, but practically sometimes that is required to help city staff recognize and to say, hey, this is actually your responsibility. You need to help us. You need to help this neighborhood. And, here are some of the tools, meaning policies or programs, or Lorraine talked about parking enforcement, right? That's a very practical tool that the city has that is at its disposal to try to, improve at least parking and access. And so I think there are those sort of in more or less formal ways. And then there's also really formal ways to try to get the city to be involved, right? And to put pressure on the city. Some of those are sort of slow, like working through a city committee or an advisory board, right? Those are sometimes, most of the time those meetings are only once a month and can kind of be hard to get things moving sometimes. But it's also, sort of one way to try to institutionalize the concern is to identify, okay, who else is sort of supposed to care about this type of thing, right? What advisory board? Is it the Environment Board? Is it the Housing and Homelessness Commission? Is it, the Administration and Public Works Committee of the City Council? Whose charge is it to care about these things, right? Because for most issues, there is a body that exists formally that is technically supposed to respond to and advocate on behalf of residents their concerns to the city council, right? So I think those are some examples, and then obviously working through your local, through your alderperson and the mayor. But I would definitely defer to the other panelists too, as in hearing their experience, particularly when you think about longevity, what works in the short term versus what works over 2 years or 5 years, right? I think those can be different strategies sometimes.
All right. Thank you for that. I think actually that helps those people who are actually, in various legs along their journey as far as trying to highlight some of these issues for the city. So thank you for that answer. So Dorothy, Environmental Justice Evanston has created an environmental justice playbook to help Evanstonians address existing EJ issues they are experiencing. Do you think that a step-by-step guide like the playbook can help Evanstonians get better resolutions to their EJ problems? Oh, you're on mute. You're muted. There you go.
I do think it probably will help if people know about it and know how to access it. I mean, I did not know that that was a playbook. We can't just do these things in, and then nobody knows how to take advantage of it. But I mean, it's going to have to be a media blitz in terms of letting people know what's out there and how to take advantage of it, because otherwise, people are not going to do it. So yeah, it probably can help, but we have to make it accessible so people will be able to, it's easily accessible, so people will be able to take advantage of it.
Very good point. Very good point as far as getting the word out on it.
Yes.
So a question for Lorraine. In your efforts to combat the environmental issues caused by the businesses in your neighborhood, have people in your neighborhood taken any actions that have been effective in the past, and why do you think that they were effective? And actually, we're going to have to try to wrap up here in the next couple of minutes, so I'm going to just preface that.
Well, I wish I had a happy answer for that. I don't think they have been effective. We have been in conversations with past aldermen about our concerns for this area. And as I mentioned, the asphalt production has doubled and the concrete production has become permanent and also year round. There are more places over here now that are providing automotive storage and repair, and there are no additional regulations that have been put in place. So I would say that there have been several citizens in this area who have been extremely diligent about trying to get things done and be in cooperation with the city, different agencies and different elected officials, and thus far, nada. But we are nothing if not resilient. And I think that we're looking now at sort of an approach of, I think one of the differences is that we literally have about 22 different entities over here that we're dealing with, all squished into a very small area, which in and of itself is part of the concern, that there's literally just a chain link fence separating one entity from the next. And so if there's an explosion in one area, the probability of it spreading to the next is pretty much a foregone conclusion. So it just heightens the danger of the possible conflagration that could occur if things started in one area, which is why when the last explosion occurred, there were 9 separate first responder units that responded from everywhere you can imagine: Winnetka, Wilmette, Skokie, Morton Grove, Lincolnwood, Evanston, Chicago, because the first responders are very much aware of the dangers of everything that is over in this area and how in such close proximity everything is to each other and how difficult it is to get to the things. So they are very aware of the danger level in this area. And I think that we need to, to take it one entity at a time, I think the divide and conquer approach, the only people who would get divided and conquered would be my neighbors and I. Because we would be tied up in so many different situations and so many different courts and so many different agencies that it would be crazy. I think we really, as a city, need to ask ourselves, how in the world did we allow this area to continue to grow? I mean, these stories go back all the way almost 50 years to when the Rust-Oleum plant blew up and caught on fire, and there were paint cans that were projectiling into our neighborhood, and police coming down the streets of our neighborhood on bullhorns telling people that they had 3 minutes to evacuate their homes. This is not a new issue. This is a 70-year-old issue that has continued to grow, not only in its size, but in the number of entities involved. So we need a sweeping approach to this, not only keep them uncomfortable by keep the parking violations coming, keeping the non-registered business violations coming, keeping the people aware of what's going on over here. But I think we absolutely need a sweeping approach of looking at the zoning, because even if we get somebody out of the area who is a problematic owner, if we don't change the zoning, we have no way of knowing that the next entity might be just as bad, if not worse.
I'm gonna have to jump in because we're getting down to like 3 minutes before the next session.
Actually, Rick, I'm sorry if this wasn't clear, but we do need actually to build a little cushion in before our next.
Okay. all right.
So we're really a little bit over time at this time. Do you want to say a few last remarks?
Yeah, I just have a couple sentences, and basically thanks to everyone as far as the panelists and the audience. We really appreciate it. We had a great session, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me.
I would like to also thank you all. It's been an incredible session with, and I think it's so important, the expertise and emotional support that you're all sharing with each other. I put Environmental Justice Evanston contact information in the chat. So anybody who has capacity to get involved, please do so. I know nobody wants to be an expert at this issue, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights. Next.